Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We'll give another maybe 30 seconds or so for people to trickle in and we'll get started. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Guelph Rain Garden Rebate Program webinar. We've got a lot to cover tonight, so we'll jump right into it. My name is Becca Robinson. I'm the Director of Climate Adaptation Programs at Reep Green Solutions. And I'm joined tonight by my colleague Ryan, who is a rain coach advisor with Reep and maybe one of the people who visits you if you proceed with the program, become a rain garden owner later this year. Just a few housekeeping issues before we dive into things. Tonight's webinar is being recorded. We will circulate a link to the webinar to everyone who registered for the event tonight. We'll be monitoring the Q&A throughout the webinar, so please type your questions into the Q&A rather than the chat if you can remember. Then Ryan and I will answer the ones we can by typing during the presentation, and at the end we'll go through any remaining questions and lob those back and forth until we get a good answer for them. We'll keep an eye on the chat as well, but we prefer Q&A if possible so we can monitor the questions as they come in. So like I mentioned, we are from Reep Green Solutions. We're an environmental charity that's been helping people in the region and Guelph live sustainably for 25 years. The mission of Reep is to empower the community with the practical tools, knowledge, and capacity for action to make sustainable living the norm. Please feel free to visit our website, reepgreen.ca, to learn about all the things we do. The Rain Garden Rebate Program is just one of our many programs we offer related to healthy landscapes, but also energy efficiency and building sustainability as well. So fundamental to our talk tonight and learning about rain gardens is the important role of watersheds in our lives and ways we can be better stewards of our land to help protect the invaluable functions that watersheds provide to us. So it's a good time to remember that the Waterloo region and the Guelph and the Grand River watershed are located on the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. We recognize the enduring presence of these people who we share this land with today and their contributions to our community. A few other notes. We have more webinars coming. So tonight's webinar is very specific to Guelph residents who are interested in participating in the Rain Garden Rebate Program offered by the City of Guelph. We have some other more broader topics coming up if you're interested in learning more with us this spring. You can see the dates and topics here, and you can register for those on our website. And we'd love to see you at some of these events as well. Similarly, we have another program we run with the City of Guelph, much like the Rain Garden program. We have a subsidized tree planting program. So this is a program we run in a variety of municipalities, including Guelph. We have certified arborists on staff who will come to your yard, help you identify the right location and the right tree species for your yard. Then we come back and do a full service planting. And that's a subsidized program, so the cost ranges from $180 to $230 depending on the tree species you select. And it's in partnership with the city as well. I think last housekeeping issue, we are organizing a Guelph Rain Garden walking tour. So if tonight you find out you're really excited about rain gardens and you want to proceed with the program, but you want to learn a little bit more, you can join us in June for a walking tour where we will show you several projects several projects that have been built through this incentive program over the past few years. And you can hear from us about them, but also from the property owners and hear what their experience was like and some of their lessons learned. So stay tuned for that. We haven't quite finalized the date, but it is typically on a Saturday in June, and we'll share that with everyone once we nail that down. So on to tonight's agenda. We're going to do hopefully quick overview of why rain gardens are important and why they're a valuable strategy to adapt to climate change in our the municipality of Guelph. Then Ryan's going to go into the details of what the rebate program is and how it works and what to expect. And then we'll go through construction. So how do you build a rain garden? And hopefully leave you with a good understanding of what to do next. So as many of you know, possibly all of you know, our climate is changing and we are expecting it to be warmer, wetter, and wilder in the near future. We're already seeing that. We've made these kind of slides for several years now, and it's starting to be more of a current reality than a future projection. But you can already see this happening, and it's expected to continue to get more severe as we approach 2050 and probably beyond. We don't know. I don't know, at least. The way we deal with wetter, wilder weather is through watersheds function. So when it rains, water falls on vegetation communities. Whatever isn't trapped on the leaves of a forest falls through the leaves and hits the ground and soaks into the soil. When the soil is completely saturated, it becomes runoff and it runs towards our systems of creeks and wetlands and eventually into water bodies like lakes or through the ground into our aquifer. This system works really well. Obviously, it's evolved over millions of years, and it's an effective way to deal with stormwater. However, in many of our urbanized areas where we lived, we've taken away some of that natural functioning in our watersheds, and we've paved over a lot of those really important ingredients, forests, ground cover, and soil, and replaced it with houses and roads and sidewalks, which we need, but there's some negative implications to that. So you can see here, instead of that nice functioning natural watershed I showed a minute ago, we have a different type of system where water falls on roofs and driveways and roads, flows into curbside catch basins on our streets, and flows right out into our waterways, creeks, and ultimately into the Grand River. And there's implications to that. As we build more and pave more, the amount of water that comes out of the end of these pipes is growing. It's faster, it's warmer, and it's dirtier. And it's causing flooding downstream from our homes, like you see here. But it's also causing flooding around our homes. So at the end of the pipe, we have a lot of habitat degradation and flooding for properties that are along waterways. But as our water volume exceeds the space in our pipes, we're also seeing lots of flooding in urban areas or residential suburban areas where the pipe system's too small for the amount of water. And so we have surface flooding throughout our streets and around our buildings. These are big issues that are happening in communities across the world, but definitely Canada and North America in general. And so the thought is, if we can start to manage our stormwater closer to where it falls in our private properties before it reaches the stormwater system of pipes, and definitely before it reaches the creeks and rivers, we have a better chance at adapting to this future climate and reducing our flood risk, not just for ourselves, but for our community members downhill from us. And so rain gardens are an important strategy to break up this system you see at the top and turn it more like a system at the bottom, which is kind of mimicking that natural watershed function I showed a few slides ago, but in a way that also acknowledges we live in a community with a pipe system and impervious surfaces that we rely upon. And so here you can see an example of a homeowner who has incorporated a rain garden in their front yard with the goal of absorbing all of the stormwater runoff falling on their property prior to it reaching the stormwater system in the street and under the street. And if more property owners can manage the rain on their own property, we'll see huge benefits downstream to reducing flood risk and protecting habitat and our water quality. So that's a bit about the why, the big picture context, and now we'll get kind of into the what is a rain garden, how does it work? So you can see here in this graphic, a rain garden is a shallow basin-shaped feature in the ground. It's downstream from a point source of water. So you can see a downspout here. Downhill from that downspout is our rain garden. So water is flowing naturally towards the rain garden through an inlet. into the basin where it can pool for long enough, as long as it takes for it to soak into the soil. Often the soil is amended, so we have a really well-draining soil. And any overflow water that accumulates, if it's a really heavy rain and it can't soak into the soil fast enough, will flow out of an outlet back towards a storm drain or another surface downstream away from your building where it would have gone naturally anyway prior to the rain garden. Plants and soil help the process. So water is going to flow into this basin and soak into the soil. Plants are really important to help promote evapotranspiration back into the atmosphere, help filter the water into the soil, as well as add wildlife habitat. So there's a few criteria we need to ensure that you have on your property before we would recommend a rain garden. Not every property is suited for a rain garden, but many are, and we have rain garden advisors on staff to help you figure out any of your challenging areas that you want to, where you want to put a rain garden, but you're not sure exactly how. So generally, a rain garden should be 3 meters or about 10 feet from a building foundation. You are trying to infiltrate water and soak it into the soil. So this is a fairly conservative criteria here to keep that infiltration further as far away from your foundation as we think you need to make sure there's nothing negative happening to your building. It needs to be on a relatively flat area, so between a 1 to 5% slope. If you're soaking in water to a sandy soil on a steeper slope, you run the risk of creating some instability. So we would recommend your rain garden be relatively flat, on a relatively flat piece of land. But we would recommend that it's downslope from your source of runoff. So you can see here the downspout on the far left. Water is falling on the house, flowing out of the downspout and downhill towards the rain garden, into the relatively flat area where the rain garden is. And it's slightly uphill from the outlet. So you have to have the topography in your yard working somewhat like this, or you need to work with your rain coach to design the topography so that it's working like this. And we would want you to be building a rain garden in a space that's clear of any underground utilities or tree roots. So obviously utilities we can't be messing around with. So we'd want to find out where those are and make sure you're not excavating an area that's got gas lines or water lines through it. We'll show you how to do that, and that's not too hard. Similarly, we don't recommend a rain garden under the canopy of a tree. It's really difficult to dig, so that you'll regret that choice for sure. It's also really bad for the tree, and trees do an amazing job at infiltrating stormwater. So we're not trying to promote rain gardens over trees. Generally, those things need to be separate, unless you're planting a tree in your rain garden, and then the roots can grow happily alongside of it. So here you see some of the criteria. I should have added the red lines sooner in my talk here, but you see we have the rain garden about 3 meters from the house. You can see the inlet is above the outlet and that the ground falls away, declines away from the rain garden. If any water were to flow out of the outlet, it'll flow away from your building. Generally, a rain garden is about 1/10 of the size of the roof area draining to it. So through this program, we'll provide a workbook and you'll meet with your rain coach and we'll help you along with this process. But as you're figuring out where in your yard you want a rain garden, we'll be looking kind of uphill towards the house and looking at your roof line to understand how much of your house is draining out of the downspout. And we will want to size your rain garden accordingly. And we've done the math to figure out approximately what size the rain garden needs to be relative to the roof size to reduce the likelihood of any overflow. We're always going to plan for an overflow outlet, but ideally we won't ever need to use it because your rain garden's the right size and it's draining really well, and it's fitting all the rain events that we have in our climate here. And the last kind of criteria is we want the soil to be well draining enough for the rain garden to be completely drained and dry, not dry necessarily, but have no standing water within 24 hours from a rain event. So you can see in this picture, there's some standing water in my rain garden here. And it had just rained. It was one of those summer days where rains really, really hard, really fast, and then it's quite nice and sunny afterwards. So it looks like a pretty day, but it had just poured rain. The rain garden's full of water. You can see some wood chips kind of floating. But within just a couple of hours from this rain event, all that water is infiltrated. So we're not creating a pond. We're not creating a water feature or a mosquito habitat. The water should drain completely away before any sort of mosquito issues arise. That's a really common question and a bit of a fear, valid fear. So if your rain garden's working correctly, that would not be an issue. All right, over to Ryan.
Yeah, thanks, Becca. So now I'm going to get into I'm going to give an overview of the rebate program process and also start to get into the design of a rain garden. And also, the first thing to share is that you can receive a rebate up to $2,000 to cover the cost of plants and materials once you have built your rain garden. The rebate amount is calculated based on the amount of water that flows into your rain garden, which is 50 cents per liter. And we make that calculation based off of your roof size and how much is water flowing into the downspout. And next slide, Becca. So there's several steps for this whole process, and I'm just going to give a brief overview of all of them right now. But the main thing I want to share is like we're going to help you through this process. So through each step, we're going to guide you along. So there's no stress here. First step, you guys are already doing it. Attend the webinar. So we're on our way now. Step two is book your first rain garden visit with a rain garden advisor and start planning the design. And then after that visit, so it would be someone like me visiting, we would give you some information, and then you would use that to submit paperwork to get your rain garden approved by the city. And then once you're approved, in step four, then you do the fun part, which is build your rain garden. And then once it's built, then I would come by again and first you'd book the final verification visit, and then I would come by again and check out your rain garden and just make sure it follows the main design criteria. And once I give you the approval, then you would submit your paperwork and receipts from all your purchases that you've made, such as plants, soil, and other materials. And then you will get, after that, the city will check your submission and then give you a rebate check. So starting back again at the beginning. So before the first initial visit with me, we would ask that you check the location of your utilities. There's a really good free service called Ontario One Call, and they will mark out your property where any utilities are, and also give you an online report. And then the second step we want you to do before our first visit is check your soil. So check for it's called a water infiltration test, and we'll get into more detail of that in the next slide. But it's just to help us understand what are the soil conditions at your site. And here's a fun video of Becca here doing that test. Great. Yeah, so that was the test. And just to summarize, essentially what you do is you dig a hole 50 centimeters deep. Um, you fill it with water, and then you let it completely drain so that the soil is saturated below it. And then you measure the distance that the water drops over the course of an hour. And that gives you your water infiltration rate. And then with that rate, we can determine if you have well draining or poor draining soil. And that helps inform our design. And we'll have more instructions in the workbook how to do it in case you missed how to do that on this video. But yeah, so the next step is, someone like me would come visit your property, and we would discuss the rain garden location again. And you'll probably have a good idea where you think it should go, but we'll make sure that it's in the right spot and it makes sense. And then we'll discuss the design, how to go about things, and I'll answer every question you throw at me. And so we'll have a good plan going forward. And then once we have that plan going, you can book a build phase visit with me. And this is to make sure you're on the right track. If you have any more questions, and just to make sure things are going well. So this is a photo of a rain garden while it's being built. You can see it taking shape with the berm on the outsides and the pit in the middle, and the inlets and the outlets being built, which I'll get into more in detail coming up. And so just to reiterate, once you feel like it's done, then you'd book that verification visit, and then I would swing by, make sure, yeah, it looks good. It looks like a rain garden. And then you would submit your final paperwork, and then the city will review it, and then you will receive your rebate. So it's a simple process. And again, we're going to be here to help you along the way. So now we're going to get into more detail of the design phase. So before digging the rain garden hole, you first have to assess your space. So there's a lot of considerations. You got to figure out, okay, where's the downspout? Because that's where we're collecting the water from. And then based on that downspout, we can pick the location for the rain garden to be, and then determine the appropriate size of the rain garden and where the inlet and outlet can be positioned. And then 6, which Becca will get into later, in the pit area of the rain garden is where you can start doing some soil amendments to make sure that the rain garden will drain well and function, so that it can collect and infiltrate water. And then later on, the fun part, we'll get into planting design, how to make your garden look beautiful and thrive ecologically. And also a bit of a maintenance plan, because that's a big part of garden design too. It's not just picking beautiful colors. It's a long-term care of your garden. And so this is the site we're going to look at. We're going to go through the step-by-step of the build phase of this property. And so we're going to look at the left side of the house, which is now on the bottom. Yeah, that's good, Becca. And we can go to the left side of the house where the shrubs were. And on this top view, we can see on the bottom right of the image here, you can see that brown pit being built in front of the shrubs. Yeah, I would say look at the mouse that Becca's using there. So there's a couple main things to assess. As Becca mentioned earlier, the root zone of plants, such as the shrubs in front of the house, utilities. Often these are alongside the house, and they'll extend towards the road. And then what else would you look at? You also look at the distance from your house. Like, is there enough room from the foundation of your house towards the sidewalk to build a rain garden? So these are the three main things. Utilities, is there space, and root zone. And then I'd also add, do you have a good downspout? And we can see the downspout here at the corner of the house. And that's where we're sourcing the water from. And so this is going to be our rain garden location. Again, just a different angle. Yeah. And then again, in blue, we can see where the rain garden is going to be built. And that's where the action is going to happen. And so we can help you with this too. But the reason why we look at the size of the roof is to determine how much water is landing on the roof and then going into the downspout. And so getting this roof area helps us with our water calculations. The larger the roof, the more water that's going to flow into that downspout in the corner. And so with that calculation, we say 10% of the roof size is used for the rain garden footprint. So the rain garden will be about 10% of the roof size that is sourcing the water. But we'll help with that calculation if that was confusing. And here we'll see a bunch of kind of garden supplies. We got a hose, even some pool gear, some noodles used to kind of outline the shape of your rain garden. So you can use anything. And we recommend this just so you can kind of get a visual of how things are going to look and how you can start scraping the grass off and kind of building this thing. And we can see in the turquoise color, the rain garden shape. And another important thing to notice is the 3 meter distance from the house and the distance from the shrubs and just the general positioning of the rain garden. It's in a zone where we can kind of guide an inlet from the house, from the corner down into the rain garden. And here's a video of Becca in action building the rain garden. So she used the hose to outline it, and she's right now removing the sod. And she's starting on the outside just so she can get that shape going. And so that's how you start. You start by getting the sod removed, and you can make adjustments along the way. It's a process where you just take your time and you just kind of assess things as you go. And this is once the sod is removed, the rain garden is starting to take shape here. And a slight berm is being formed on the outside. And yeah, a rain garden is starting to form. And the next step after this is to form the inlet and outlet. So this can be sometimes a trickier part, but there's a lot of solutions we can use, and we'll help you determine what is the best way to go about it. So there's underground pipes that you can use, like a big O pipe that you could use to kind of go underneath the deck. We kind of recommend doing above ground inlets because there's kind of less risk involved, less complexity, and less things can go wrong. They're easier to build too, but it's not always possible depending if it's in front of a main walkway or something. And here's another inlet on all these photos, but you can see it being built here. The main point I want to kind of raise with the inlets is that you want them to be on a constant downslope from the downspout into your rain garden. We want that so that water is flowing away from the house into your rain garden and not into your foundation. Again, this is the same property from above. So we can see within that red circle, the inlet location. And so it's just connected to the corner of the house right into the rain garden. And here's another view of it. So Becca added a pretty cool design feature, which was to put um, a rain barrel connected to the downspout so that she can store water there to water her other plants in the garden. And then when the rain barrel fills up, when there's excess water, it then flows through um, the hose, which then flows into the rain garden. So it's this water management system that we have here that works quite nicely. And you can do this at your house too, and we can help you with that. And so once you have the inlet where water comes into the rain garden, we need to have an exit plan. And the point of this is so that during really high rainfall events, water doesn't fill up completely and go over the sides of the rain garden. We're controlling so that it exits to a very specific point. So the outlet is on the left photo, the rocks on the bottom. And another key point that Becca brought up earlier is that the outlet should be at a lower elevation than inlet. And that's so we ensure that water will flow away from the house again. Again, if that's confusing, we'll help you with this. We'll make sure that it's designed correctly. And for the outlets and inlets, you can use natural river stone, and you can get that from most landscape yards. And people like to look at the stone too. And here is another build phase project. And so with the inlets and outlets, you kind of want to like dig into the ground so you can kind of make this river channel. But in this example, they're showing how by putting kind of a berm on the outsides of the rain garden, you don't actually have to dig in. You can just raise the level of the berms, and then your inlets and outlets will already be at a lower level. And here's another kind of view of the rain garden being built. The landscape fabric underneath the inlets and outlets here were used mainly for weed control. And just because with moisture going in and out, between, weeds can sometimes grow on the rocks, but it's not usually a huge concern. Again, we can see the outlet location in the red circle. And yes, we're just trying to get that conveyance of water. And here's a nice final view of the rain garden with the inlet, the rain garden pit, and the outlet. And that's the same property that we've been discussing the past while. And so rain gardens, they're simple. You have an inlet, a pit, and an outlet. And Becca's going to get more into the soil amendments and the little more technical stuff coming up now.
All right. Yeah, so Ryan's got you talked through the skeleton kind of your rain garden, the parts you have to get right. You want to size it right. You want to get water to go into it correctly and make sure there's always an emergency escape hatch for water. The rain coach will help you every step of the way to get those exactly right. Now we're going to add some extra stuff to take it all the way to the finish line. So the next step we'll talk about is planning your soil amendments. So a rain garden has to have well-draining soil, otherwise it's a pond. And like, as I mentioned before, we're not creating a water feature or a mosquito breeding area. We want it to soak up water relatively quickly. And so it's imperative that the soil under your rain garden is well draining. Ryan talked you through the infiltration test. Most of you probably live on well-draining soil. We've been operating this program in Guelph for 5 years, and very often the soil is well draining naturally. And that's good news, but it's important that we check because the odd property does have heavy clay content in their soil or compacted soil that doesn't look like anything natural. It's just squished over years, or maybe in a new build development where all the topsoil was removed and heavy machinery was recently there. And so regardless of the soil type, it's just not draining well. So we need to figure that out, and that's why you do the infiltration test at the beginning, and then the rain coach will help you figure out your soil amendments. Oops. So we'll be trying to understand if your soil is sands, loam, or clay. But as I mentioned, sometimes it doesn't really matter. We just want to know how quickly water will drain through it. And there's lots of factors that will impact that beyond just the soil type. And we'll find that out with the infiltration test. So let's say you have well-draining soil, which most of you will. Here's a cross-section of your rain garden and kind of a little diagram of what construction will look like. We will want you to dig your rain garden to a depth of approximately 40 centimeters in the area in little kidney bean shape or whatever shape your rain garden ends up being with your garden hose, like in the picture we showed before. We're looking to remove soil for about 40 centimeters depth. Because you already have well-draining soil, we don't need to doctor it up too much. We will just be adding a layer of compost, and that's organic material that will help your soil be biologically active, which increases its infiltration and ability to host other organisms, fungus, etc., that makes it healthy and absorb soil well. So for you, you'll be digging a 40 centimeter basin, putting in a layer of compost and stirring it up a little bit so it's mixing in with your native soil. Then simply adding a 10 centimeter layer of mulch. And that will be to suppress the weeds and to give the plants a fighting chance to survive. It helps protect them from drought. It helps retain moisture in the soil during the dry periods when your rain garden will be trying to survive a drought versus trying to survive a storm. And then the remaining 20 centimeters left of your basin will be ponding depth. So it will be a basin shape in the ground. 20 centimeters isn't super deep. And that's at the deepest. So it'll be 20 centimeters in the center and then kind of feathered back up to the existing grade outside of your rain garden. So not terribly complicated to build, and just a few materials you would need to purchase or acquire. Compost and mulch you can get at a landscape supply store or even just a like big box kind of hardware type store with a garden center. You can find compost for free sometimes at the landfill that's like old yard waste, which is really great. So it could be that you're really just looking at purchasing some mulch. We recommend shredded mulch rather than like bark, wood chip or wood bark, because wood bark just floats and goes out your outlet. And shredded mulch kind of sticks together, binds to the ground better and to your plants. And so you're less likely to need to replace it. So here's my example here. My soil was incredibly sandy. Um, I've never seen standing water in my rain garden, even while it's actively raining. And so I'm just mixing compost in. I dug my basin about 40 centimeters and I'm digging some compost into the soil. You can see while it's very sandy, it doesn't look particularly healthy, like it would host a lot of plants well. So the compost will help add that organic matter to sustain plant life, because that was my real goal, is to have cool plants in the yard. Whoops, I keep playing videos twice, sorry. So for those of you who have worse news on your infiltration test and find out that you don't have very well draining soil, you can still participate in this program. We just need to add some more sand and compost to your soil. So for this, we would be asking you to excavate a larger, a deeper basin. So instead of just a 40 centimeter dig, we'd be looking to do an 80 centimeter dig. So really removing a lot of your native soil because it's not well draining. It might be clay or heavily compacted. So we'd be excavating that from your basin and then replacing it with a 50 centimeter layer of sand and compost. And then again, 10 centimeters of mulch and your ponding depth. So we would be helping you figure out the volume of material you need to buy. But you'd be buying some sand and buying some compost, mixing it together and putting it back in your basin. Rain garden soil ideally is about 60% sand and 40% compost. So we have a little calculator we'll use with you if you determine that your soil is poorly draining and you need to go this route. We'll give you some real clear guidelines onto what to purchase and what quantity to purchase. Some places like higher or more industry level landscape supplies, places will mix it for you and just deliver a dump truck or whatever, couple of yards of this material pre-mixed. I think it's less expensive and easier to do yourself if you just go buy some sand and go buy some compost and mix it together, which you can see we're doing here in a wheelbarrow. And we're kind of estimating like 4 bags of compost and 5 bags of sand, roughly is like 60/40. Probably not now that I say that, but you know what I mean. You want to kind of just guesstimate a bit that you're getting that 60/40 mix. Doesn't have to be precise. Um, yeah, let's see if I feel like I missed some things there. So we'll help you with that. The infiltration test is key. We ask that you do the infiltration test before the first visit so that we can get into this nitty-gritty detail with you during the rain garden visit. If you haven't, that's okay. We'll help walk you through it and you can email us the results later. And we'll try to sort out the rest of the details via email, but it's a lot easier and your first visit's a lot more productive if you've already started this process before we arrive. If you saw the video, we can't sit there for that whole hour while you're doing the test. So it's good to do it beforehand. All right, so we've built a basin. We filled it back in with well-draining soil and mulch. We have a functioning inlet and a functioning outlet. That truly is all you need to accomplish the goal of a rain garden. But the plants add a lot of benefits, make it more efficient, make it more beautiful, make it worth all that trouble of digging. So now we'll get into planting design. So a rain garden is not a normal place to live for a typical landscaping plant you'd pick up at the garden center. Um, it's going to receive lots of rain really quickly all at once. So the plants you put in your rain garden need to be able to withstand total inundation for several hours, up to 24 hours. But also because your soil is so well draining, they need to be able to withstand drought conditions in between rain events. Moisture will infiltrate quickly through your soil and they'll be dry. So in between the rain events in the summer, for example, it's drought. And there's this relatively small range of plants that can tolerate both of those extremes. And they're almost always native plants. And we recommend native plants for lots of reasons besides that. They're better suited for our climate. They're better evolved with our native insects, so they support wildlife better, provide a more natural food source, higher protein, etc. But really, most importantly here, we want plants that are going to survive because we don't want to promote things that require like a lot of watering or die during your first rain event because they're not used to being in that much water. So when you're choosing plants for your rain garden, the first most important conditions to consider are soil conditions, light conditions, and mature size. So we kind of know the soil conditions. We're planning that through our soil amendments. So no one should be trying to buy plants that are clay, need to be in clay soils. We're already controlling for that by planting or by creating a rain garden with sandy soils mixed with organic matter. So we kind of know that already. Light conditions will vary depending on where your rain garden is. So often rain gardens are in full sun because we recommend they're far from the house or 10 feet from the house and far from a tree. So often that results in a full sun rain garden. But occasionally there is part shade or deep shade rain gardens, and there are plants that will work for you. So good to know that when you're picking your location, start to observe it this time of year before you want to plant to see just how much sun it gets during the day. Anything that gets 6 hours or more would be considered full sun. 3 to 6 hours of sun a day would be considered part sun. Less than 3 hours is shade. And the other thing you want to consider is the mature size of your plants. So these little plants on the right are native plant plugs. They're very cute and small, but they will grow to be quite large. So you could get something like this and plant it, and the next year it's like 10 feet tall. So you just need to do your research to understand what species you're choosing, so that then when they reach their mature height, that you still like them. And there's lots of options of various heights depending on what you're looking for. So we've tried to take the guesswork out of that, and we've put together a rain garden plant list that we will provide you along the way. Here's just one page from it that's showing a variety of native flowering perennials. On the plant list, we show you the common name, pale purple coneflower up here, the Latin name, because it's good to know that. We tell you the mature height, 2 to 3 feet tall here. The sun icons here are telling us if it's full sun or part shade or full shade tolerant. So this plant's kind of full sun or part sun, that's good. And like I mentioned, there's fewer plants that are tolerant of full shade, but there are some. So you'll have to flip through the plant guide and find the ones that work for your setting. And then the S and the B are for side slope of your rain garden or for the basin. So obviously, because you're building a basin-shaped rain garden, the deeper center part of your rain garden will get the most water. It'll probably stay moist the longest. It'll have standing water the longest. So those plants are really specialized. And there's quite a few on our list that have a B on them, and many have both an S and a B. The ones that are pretty good with a rain garden, but not quite as tolerant are S. And so you'd want to be building that like kind of on the sides of your basin where it's starting to come meet up with the existing grade around your rain garden. And there's a few more plants probably that are tolerant of the S conditions versus the B, but there's lots of both. And this isn't a perfect science, but generally you want to gather the base plants in the center of your rain garden and then feather out with side plants. Our plant guide also includes a variety of shrubs and trees, so woody plants, and they're a great addition to any planting design because it provides you some interest. It's 365. In the winter, all those beautiful flowering perennials will be melted, gone from the ground. Often, some will remain above ground but not be thriving. Um, and so your rain garden can look kind of bleak in the winter, but if you put woody plants in it or around it, it really helps give it some structure that holds it together, kind of anchors the space year round. So here's some examples of woody shrubs that tolerate rain gardens. Notice the size is really large. Native shrubs are really large. And so there are some categories of shrubs that are called nativars. So it's like a cultivar of a native plant. So 1 degree removed from a pure native, and they're often cultivated to be smaller. So I'll show you an example in a minute of red osier dogwood around my rain garden. It's a nativar, and so it's going to be 3 to 5 feet tall instead of 10 feet tall because I don't want a 10-foot tall dogwood in front of my front window. So keep an eye on that and look around at several nurseries until you find like the right species and the right mature size. Generally try to stick native, but in this woody plant instance for many urban yards, it's just not practical. So the second tier of conditions to consider would be seasonal interest, texture, bloom color, and leaf color. And these are just quick tips for how to make sure your garden is attractive. We want to make the first tier of considerations, make sure your garden will survive. Now, looking beyond that, we want to make sure it looks good. So let's see, I'll talk about seasonal interest back here. We've already talked a little bit about shrubs. They provide an opportunity to create seasonal interest in the winter. So we want to make sure you have something interesting going on spring, summer, fall, and winter. This is a yellow twig dogwood here with the evergreen yew behind it. So you can achieve winter interest with those types of plants. So plants that have interesting stems, even though the leaves are gone, or evergreens. The yews wouldn't survive in a rain garden, but they are a round one. So you can also kind of consider what you plant outside of your rain garden, but kind of part of your project to make sure that the space is interesting. You can also leave up grasses and some perennials and not remove them. That's what I do. So that grasses, while they're not green, they're not flowering, they're still there. And I think they're quite pretty with snow on them. Or maybe you leave up the seed heads from your echinacea. It's not as beautiful purple flower, but it's kind of cool to have like black stems, flowers, and birds go to them. So consider not cutting down your perennials even when they're not in their prime appearance. And that will give you some winter interest as well. Texture, I like to look at nature for inspiration. And so these are just wildflower pictures from a forest that I thought really illustrated the idea of texture and planting design. So when I'm designing a planting, any planting, but a rain garden for sure, I try to mix broad textures with fine texture so that you don't have too many little tiny things going on or too many big fat things. And so here you can see nature's way of doing that. We have some big fat leaves that are mayaples, not planted, occurring right beside maybe what is sweet woodruff on the ground. Both are native ground covers, but because they have very different textures, you can kind of appreciate both. And you can see that over here too with some of these fine textured ferns. I'm not totally sure what that species is. Down here we have probably like a Christmas fern next to a big broadleaf of a trillium. So I plant things in like groups, 3 to 5 or something. So you have a big chunk of plant next, and I plant like a broad fat leaf next to a fine textured, more messy kind of leaf. And I think that creates a really nice balance. It's easy on the eye. In terms of color palette, there's lots of colors to choose from in plants. And again, nature kind of gives us tips on what looks good together. On the left, you can see asters and goldenrods blooming in the fall. And so I think that's just a beautiful combination. So something to think about. When am designing a rain garden, I'll kind of write out the list of plants I'm thinking about, and I'll maybe put a colored pencil beside them of what bloom color they are, or just write it down. So you can kind of keep track of the colors you're including in your garden and maybe when they're blooming. So you can make sure the colors are things you like or complementary. On the right, you can see we have a lilac in bloom that's outside of the rain garden, but it's next to a rain garden that's got blue flag iris, some allium bulbs and ferns, and like a black elderberry behind it. So kind of various shades of purple and black, which look really nice with the different green shades. And then this example here, I think is valid or important to show because it mixes native with non-native. So this was a property that was heavily non-native. It's a daylily farm. So this homeowner loved daylilies and had a million of them, but they actually aren't that ecologically useful in our climate. I'm sure they are somewhere, but they're non-native. This type, at least non-native flowers, they don't really support a lot of insects. And so for this garden, we kind of removed some of the daylilies and incorporated natives like butterfly weed and little blue stem, both of which are tolerant in rain gardens, to add that wildlife habitat integrated with the non-natives because there's sentimental value for this homeowner. So while I'm a big proponent of native plants, I like to include this to say the goal is to love your garden and to have a place that makes you feel good. So I think mixing natives and non-natives is a great way to do that, a very valid way to do that, as long as you're sure that your non-native plants aren't invasive. So kind of get to know the plants you're planting, whether they're native or non-native. Make sure they're not detrimental to your space. And when you can, integrate some complementary natives next to your non-natives if you have some that are close to your heart and you really want to include. Oops. So with those basics in mind, we'll look back at our little test property here. To anchor my rain garden, I planted 3 red osier dogwoods, cultivar version, so that they're shorter, dwarf red osier dogwoods in the back of my rain garden, but with their stems planted decidedly on the side slope of the basin, so they are pretty wet. These plants love water. If you have poorly draining areas in other spots of your yard where you're not going to build a rain garden, red osier dogwoods will probably be happy there. They're helpful plants in that respect. So that's going to be my winter interest, and will kind of anchor the space and give me a little more freedom to play around with colorful perennials, which I've added here. So in the basin of my garden, I went to my plant list and I looked for those bee plants for basin where it's going to be the most saturated for the longest. I've picked Joe Pye weed, blue flag iris, and Liatris spicata, a blazing star, and mix those together in little groups. I think they look nice together and they're colors I personally like. But you can see in this picture, the Joe Pye weed here is planted with like a white echinacea, maybe some garden phlox and some purple echinacea. So there's lots of combinations that look great. It's a fun opportunity just to pick colors that you like. Then on the outside of my garden, where it mattered a little bit less because I'm looking at the side slopes and then right beyond the rain garden where it's just regular kind of conditions and you can plant a broader range of things. I mixed in a variety of natives. We've got little blue stem. This is a really great compact clump forming native grass. I find it really helpful in the landscape because it provides that year-round structure. Like mine are up still now. They're not that color, they're brown, but they still look pretty nice. And then in a few weeks, depending on how quickly we get to warm weather permanently, I'll cut back the brown vegetation and the new green stuff grows through. So it's just a real quick transition. These plants thrive in a rain garden. Um, there's lots of fern species that do as well. Ostrich ferns really like to be in quite wet soil, so they can go down in the basin. And then there's some more kind of evergreen ferns, Christmas ferns, and things that prefer drier conditions, but you could plant them around the edges of your rain garden. Butterfly weed, which I mentioned before, it's a type of milkweed. So you could potentially have some monarchs laying eggs on these types of plants. It's a little more compact and shorter than the regular common milkweed, if you're familiar with that. Aster, I showed that earlier. There's lots of varieties of aster, some of which can tolerate a rain garden, some can't. So look at the plant list and ensure you're choosing a variety or a species rather that is tolerant of wet soils. Aster is great because it blooms quite late. And when you think about migrating monarchs or other pollinators that are still active in September, October, there's not as many flowers blooming. So trying to plant something that blooms late into the fall is a really nice thing to do for pollinators. Goldenrod and aster together are great. Bee balm is another good one that likes pretty wet soils. This is spotted bee balm, so not the red kind that's a little more common. This is obviously pinkish purple. It blooms pretty early. So again, I try to keep track of when things bloom. I've got an early spring, I've got a midsummer, I've got a late summer, fall, and then some just interesting foliage plants to kind of hold the space together. And so now you see my planting design is complete. And I can check out my shopping cart where I buy my plants online. And so here's what the garden looks like after I planted it with those plants. So kind of dinky compared to the beautiful flower photos I just showed, but that's okay. I literally just planted it in this photo. And I'll show you what it looks like afterwards. It looks a lot different now. And so one note I wanted to make, when you looked at the aerial of this property before, I wanted my rain garden to not just be like an island out in the yard. I wanted it to be integrated into a general front landscape. So while I have the rain garden here, as we've seen throughout, like the outline of the garden bed is quite a bit bigger than my rain garden, and it extends across my sidewalk over to the driveway. So you can think of the rain garden project as like one piece of a larger garden bed if you want. And then it doesn't need to be like a feature that's out in the grass separate from the rest of your yard. I think the best rain gardens are kind of integrated into the rest of your garden, or you create a new garden that does that. So that's kind of what I was trying to achieve here. I mean, most people who come to my house or walk by wouldn't know it's a rain garden, which is kind of the goal. And this is just a picture of like Joe Pye weed, like a month or two after that, like the picture I just showed where I just planted it. So the plants grow fast. This stuff's now like taller than me in the summer, and I wanted it that way. I put it in the location where I didn't mind having that height. So just again, a reminder to double check your mature size of the plants you choose before you plant them. And our last step, the maintenance plan. So it's good to know what maintaining a rain garden is like before you decide to do it. Every season, most importantly now in the spring and in the winter before the snow flies, you want to check your inlet and outlet and make sure they're running free and clear. So you can get leaves and sticks and whatever's in them, just throw it out, put it in your yard waste pile or throw it in somewhere else in the garden. You want to make sure that you've maintained that slope into your inlet and out your outlet, and there's nothing that's happened over the year that's blocking it up or clogging it. So that's the most important thing. You will have to water your garden after you plant it. So native plants are tolerant to drought, the ones we recommend for sure. However, they need a chance to get established before they're that hardy and available to be tolerant to drought. So your first summer for sure, you need to water your plants during dry periods so that they can survive. like Ryan mentioned, having a rain barrel nearby or integrated into your plan is helpful for that reason. You have a source of water that's free and healthier for your plants right there. So at least one summer, maybe two, until those plants can get established and have healthy root systems. And then you'll be surprised how drought tolerant they can be. We recommend that you top up your mulch annually or every other year just to maintain coverage over the soil. And that'll help protect your plants from drought. It'll retain moisture. It'll suppress weeds. Um, and ideally, your plants will grow to cover more ground, so you'll have less and less mulch to apply. But as your garden's getting established, the mulch is pretty important. So we've walked you through what the rain garden is, how to participate in the program, what to expect, and the steps for building a rain garden. And now the last step is to request your first rain garden visit. So you can now, if you want, or at the end of the quick Q&As, visit guelph.ca/rain garden. And right there on the website is a form. I think you scroll down a little bit and request your first visit. So if you click on that, you can request your first visit. It's pretty simple. I think it's just name and address and maybe a few small questions or tick boxes. The city will get that information, and then someone at Reep, one of our colleagues, will reach out to schedule your first rain garden visit. And it might be Ryan or one of our other excellent rain garden advisors. So with that, we'll say thanks for joining us, and we can now start looking through the Q&A. Anything else to add, Ryan, before we do that? Nope.
Nope.
All right. So I'll read the top one and then we can kind of spitball back and forth. Is there a system that maintains the sewer drain system so it's not backed up onto the street, making heavy flow of water eventually? Yeah, so I think you're kind of referring to the overland flooding I showed at the beginning. This is an issue in many of our municipalities where our pipe systems are undersized for our current storm patterns. That is the essence of like our challenge with climate change. Municipalities are trying to update pipe systems, make them bigger. It takes a long time and it's really expensive, which is why a lot of municipalities are incentivizing things like rain gardens. If we can reduce the water that enters the system, it will be better for everyone and will reduce those types of things from happening. So that's like the long game. Let's put more rain gardens on properties or absorbent landscapes to reduce the volume making it to the sewer, and then it's less likely to back up. In the meantime, if you have that happening near you, you need to contact the city about that. There's some things they can do to ensure there's no clogs or things going on underground that might help. And the Rain Garden workbook that we'll provide when you sign up for the program has the resource to do that. But otherwise, I think if you just Googled the City of Guelph, like stormwater, I'm sure there's a contact there to report those types of issues. All right. I'm going to ask this one, Ryan, do you want to answer this one? So we have water pooling in our backyard after rain events. And unfortunately, there isn't a clear path for it to drain like an outlet. Would a rain garden still be appropriate for this situation?
Hmm. That's a tricky question, having not been there, like to your house. So I'd recommend just booking an appointment and then we can assess it. But again, we looked at the inlets. There's a couple different solutions we can work with. And you also mentioned an outlet, but again, I think we have to look at the property. What do you think, Becca?
Yeah, I agree. Having a site visit, nothing beats having like custom advice on your property. This is a cool program for that to get like site-specific advice for free. Um, in the past, we've had a couple situations like this where it's tough to figure out an outlet. Some backyards are graded such that there isn't an outlet, and sometimes neighboring properties make changes to their grading and stuff, so it kind of like leaves you in a bad situation. Um, what we've done in some of those situations is just oversized the rain garden. So maybe instead of a tenth of your area, it's like a lot. Yeah, we size it up, double the size of our normal recommendation or something like that. So accommodate for those situations. But I agree with you, Ryan. It would be a circumstance that needs advice in person, but not a deal breaker at this point. Um, how well does the lawn absorb water? Poorly. Um, lawn is notorious for thatching and being compacted. It has really shallow roots and has a really short biomass above ground. So in some cases, lawn can kind of thatch together to be almost as impervious as like your driveway. There's runoff tests, infiltration tests on different types of plant material, and sometimes lawn is just as bad as a hard surface. So there's things you can do if you have to, if you want lawn, like many people do. Minimize where you have lawn is step one. The more deep-rooted plants you can have in your landscape, the better. Where you need lawn, you can have it, obviously. It's good to keep the soil healthy, so applying like top dressing with compost is helpful to keep all those organisms in your soil alive and moving, and that naturally aerates your soil so that it absorbs more water. You can unnaturally aerate your soil with like aeration surfaces or um, and that helps too. But I think the thought of like insects and things doing that naturally by living in your soil is kind of cool. And that's what I would do. So top dressing your lawn and overseeding it with drought tolerant plants that have deeper roots. There's some good resources on like Ontario Seed Company or Ontario, I want to say like Native Wildflower Farm. There's some cool seed companies that have good information on like seed blends you can use on top of your existing lawn to help um, improve its ability to absorb water or host wildlife. Let's see.
Becca, there was a good question I answered earlier, and it was about can you use the soil you've excavated for the surrounding berm?
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and so the answer is yes. We want you to use the soil you're digging up in the pit um, to make that berm. And by making that berm, you can also kind of shape your inlets and outlet.
Yeah. You want to use it as close to your rain garden as possible, just so you don't have to deal with it. Um, and the berms are really helpful, like Ryan said, to help you ensure your inlet and outlet are functioning well by raising the ground around them. And it makes for a nice aesthetic to have a little bit of interest on the earth around it. So yeah, I think my berms are always right around the basin, right where their shovel lands kind of when you're digging it out. Um, compost and sand mixed for the center. Compost breaks down quickly. Sand infiltrates into the subsoil. Will the center of the garden drop down over time? Good question. Well, so in terms of compost breaking down quickly, hopefully the plants you've put in there will be kind of generating their own compost going forward. So you're giving them a little jump start by adding compost. Then they'll start to create their own healthy soil by shedding leaves and things onto the ground that decompose. So you're just kickstarting that process at the beginning. Sand infiltrates into subsoil. I suppose so. I've never once you've built your rain garden and planted it, I've never had an example where someone needed to like go back in and replace the soil or amend it further. So I don't think that's like as big of an issue as it might seem. Will the center drop down? Yeah, it could, especially if you have poorly draining soil and you're removing a lot and replacing it with new. We recommend that you replace it by like a 10 centimeter layer, tamp it down with your feet, another 10 centimeters, tamp it down with your feet. So it's you're not heavily compacting it, but you're kind of putting it in courses um so that in the winter or the spring when the snow melts, it's not going to sink down as it gets compressed by that weight. Somebody across the street from me did a big excavation project in their front yard, and right now it's like a sinkhole because they didn't do that I should have taken a picture for this type of thing. Um, but yeah, putting it in courses and tamping it down is really critical so you don't have a sinkhole the following spring. Let's see. This one's important. I submitted a request for a consultation a couple of weeks ago. Should I resubmit? No, we have lots of submissions already for a visit. Today was kind of our gateway day. We'll now start contacting you and booking those visits. So stay tuned. If you've already submitted an application, that's wonderful. If you're doing so today, that's great too. And we will be in touch as soon as we can to start scheduling the visits. That'll happen next week. The scheduling will happen next week. The visits will happen a little further into April, just so it's solidly not winter when we do them. All right. We have water pooling in our backyard after rain events. And unfortunately, I already read that. Okay, we already answered that. Sorry. What kind of plants and bushes help absorb the most water? Um, yeah, I guess there's a couple of things. The plants we're talking about tonight are rain garden plants. So they help, but they need to be in sandy, well-draining soils. And so there's some other plants that are tolerant of like permanently saturated soils. Those are going to be more on like the aquatic side or submergent plants. So if you're talking about for a rain garden, the plants we've talked about and that we have on our plant list on our website, reepgreen.ca/healthy yards. That's where the plant list is, and that will be the best for rain gardens. If you're talking about another situation where you want a plant that absorbs water, um, I would recommend searching at a native plant nursery, like online database type of thing for plants that like saturated soil or clay soil. And there's lots of species that would like that, depending on your light conditions. Um, Canadian Wildlife Federation has a really good native plant encyclopedia that you can kind of put your conditions in, and it'll tell you some plant suggestions. So you could put in like saturated soils or something, and it would help narrow down your choices. All right. What if you don't live in Guelph? Well, you can't participate in the rebate program, sadly. Uh, because of that, we've tried to put a lot of great resources on our website. I'll write it in the answer here, reepgreen.ca/healthy yards. So hopefully you can still build a fabulous rain garden, but unfortunately you wouldn't qualify for the rebate or the coaching service. But if you're interested in getting that in your community, feel free to advocate for that with your stormwater utility at the municipality or with your counselor. Okay. An irrigation system helps transfer access water in your yard. Protect your foundation. Can it be used as an inlet if it's already installed? Um, Broadly, you can use other sources of water in your rain garden. So like for an example, a sump pump. I'm not as familiar with the irrigation system in this circumstance, but like a sump pump, for example, that's pulling water away from your foundation and flushing it out into your yard, definitely can be integrated into a rain garden. And your rain coach would help you scale up your rain garden to accommodate for that in addition to your roof water. An irrigation system, we'd have to look at that in person, I think, to figure out exactly what it is. We probably wouldn't want to be using like potable water as the inlet. We're trying to absorb rainwater. So depending on the situation, maybe. Do you have anything to add, Ryan?
No, that's I think we have to visit the property.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Is a no-till option possible for a rain garden? Great question. Um, yes, is my short answer, I think. Ideally, well, for this program, we have worked out the cross sections we presented, and we do require like the basin shape with the ponding depth. If you have really well draining soil, the idea is to integrate compost to it, but we understand the perspective of like not disturbing native soil. Your rain garden coach can work with you to minimize that while still meeting the parameters of the program. Outside of the program, if you weren't pursuing the rebate and things, yeah, for sure. If your soil is really well draining and you suspect it's already, supporting plant life and healthy, yeah, it's really about grading your property, and creating that inlet and outlet. And so it would be you could do some minimum grading to achieve a rain garden. Um, Still worth meeting with a rain garden coach to assess that and make, like, if you're interested in receiving the rebate check, um, your rain garden can help work with you to maintain and preserve your soil the best they can. Yes, the rebate includes the cost of plants. So anything associated with building the rain garden, including labor, a contractor, we didn't talk about that much tonight, could be covered. The rebate is capped based on the size of rain garden that you need to build. So let's say your roof calculation tells you to build a 4 square meter rain garden, but you build a 10 square meter rain garden, your rebate's capped at what it would be for a 4 square meter rain garden. So the rain garden coach will talk you through that, but we're not trying to landscape the whole yard or anything with this project. We want it to be capped based on what size it needs to be. Plants, soil, rocks, fabric, um, hiring someone to help you dig, all that kind of stuff would qualify. And we have a customer service team available to answer lots of nitty-gritty questions along the way if you're not sure and you want a fast answer. Mhm. Do you have options for properties with steeper slopes to provide some infiltration? Do you want to answer that, Ryan? I'm really throwing you on the spot there. I
Yeah.
can try if you don't.
Wait. Just looking at the question. Yeah, so it depends on the slope. We'd have to in our rain garden workbook, there is direction of how to like determine the slope of your property. Um, Sometimes they're just too steep and it's kind of difficult to build a rain garden. But the technique you would use is like cut and fill. So you kind of cut into the slope and then build on the back side of it to kind of level out the ground. Um, but yeah, you could also there's we'd have to see the property, but you could also kind of build across the slope, and you build like a longer rain garden that kind of goes horizontally across the slope potentially. Um, but you know, that could be a fun project. I don't know. Do you have any ideas, Becca?
I mean, to repeat what you've already said, like getting a rain coach visit could still be super helpful. To see if you can incorporate elements of a rain garden there on your slope or nearby your slope. Like sometimes there's some creative ways to accomplish these projects, and it's helpful to have an outside eye. Um, Otherwise, like I think on a slope, I'd be looking more at interception rather than infiltration. And so planting is great. Interception just means like preventing the water from hitting the ground. And if you plant a slope with shrubs and trees, maybe multiple layers of plant material, very little water will get through all that onto your soil. So that's another good perspective to take if you're not in a situation where you want to promote infiltration. Plant, plant, plant. Um, I had my rain garden visit last spring, but didn't get it done. That's okay. Yes, you can still participate this year. You could, Mary and I would submit a form again, like at this website, raingarden.ca or guelph.ca/raingarden. And then when we get in touch to book the visit, you could just let us know that you already had it, and we can find out if you are prepared to go forward. Great. If you need another visit to refresh everything, then that's okay too. Um, but yes, we've had that a couple times where people have good intentions and then it just doesn't quite happen. And yes, you can do it again this coming year. Do you know how much building a rain garden might cost on average? That's a great question. Um, I'll say something and then Ryan jump in. Uh, I think I don't, I'll have to hold off a second on the on average part, but almost always if a homeowner is doing it themselves, the rebate covers all the costs. And that's how it's designed to work. We have done a bunch of like scenarios to make sure if you're just buying the materials, the rebate covers that. Um, when people are hiring a contractor, it's usually more expensive than the rebate covers, unless they're just hiring someone to do like dig a hole for a half a day or something. If it's like a landscape contractor that's full service, it will almost guaranteed exceed the value of the rebate. Um, the rebate's up to $2,000. So I think like our average rebate size is like 875 to $1,000 or so. Would you say that's right,
Yeah,
Ryan?
yeah, I'd agree.
Okay. Anything else to add to that?
No, it's pretty rare that people have a rain garden large enough that it gets to the $2,000 range. So it's usually in the $1,000 or less than that range.
Yeah. The knobs you can turn are like the size of plants you buy. So if you're buying native plant plugs, they're pretty inexpensive relative to like, a 5-gallon dogwood shrub. That would be like $60 versus like a $10 plug or something. So plant material can really vary in cost. The other stuff, compost, mulch, rocks, we kind of have that hardwired in. So unless you're planting like a really ornate woody plant arboretum or something really expensive, like you'll probably be fine. Are there walnut tolerant plants for rain gardens? Ooh, good question. Yes. There's several plant lists that show walnut or juglone tolerant plants. I can look some up and put them in the chat here while if Ryan's talking in a minute. This is kind of a tricky topic because if we recommend something, like it's a experiment to put stuff near a walnut. There's some recommendations that are like likely to succeed, but there's no guarantees, just like there's nothing to guarantee like a bunny won't eat your plants. Um, I'll try to look up the list here in a second and I can type it into the answer, but the bare minimum, you could Google like walnut tolerant rain garden and you'll find some plant lists. Ryan, do you have any go-to resources for that?
Um, it might be kind of getting out of the question, but I remember our colleague Heather Shibley, Becca, she's
Mm-hmm.
a landscape architect at Dugan, was saying that she read some research papers recently that juglin isn't as toxic as people initially thought. Um, but that being said, we can do some research into what is the best plants for that.
Yeah, I had like a little smile on my face from when that question is because that is a bit of like a scientific quagmire. Just
Mhm.
on a quick Google, um, red as your dogwood is considered juggler intolerant and great for rain gardens, and serviceberry is considered juggler intolerant and great for rain gardens as well. So you'll have a more limited palette, but there's definitely plants um, that will work. Canada anemone is so almost you like you want to pick some plants that are kind of aggressive because they'll likely not be aggressive in that condition. Coneflower, Canada anemone, these are all good rain garden plants. Um, Prairie dropseed. And then your rain garden coach will definitely help you dig into this. So I again recommend the visit. Are there any local landscapers that focus on native plants and sustainable practices? For sure. Um, we recommend that you go to Landscape Ontario, which is kind of the network of landscape contractors, to search up specific ones that are active in your area. We try to remain neutral on that topic, but we've approved rain gardens that have been built by contractors as part of a much larger project at the house where they're working. So like the program will work fine if you have a contractor doing it, and we've done that several times. So Landscape Ontario is a great place to get specific contacts for that. All right, this seems like a good one for you, Ryan. When you build the berm, how do you maintain the hill of soil so it doesn't get washed away by the rain? Not the rain from the inlet, the rain from the sky. Is mulch and new plants good enough?
Yeah, I like that question. Yeah, so like I guess there's 2 points. The one point is that don't make the berm too steep. If it's too steep, then it's just unstable as it is. Um, so make sure it's not too steep. But then, yeah, you're right on the right track there. The mulch will help kind of reduce the impact of falling rain and kind of reduce that erosion, especially if it was a more coarser mulch with larger um, kind of bark chunks. And also plants. Plants are always the answer. So some plants, like you can use a ground cover, for example, which is good at stabilizing soil. Like Canada anemone is a good ground cover. Even wild strawberry is a good ground cover. Um, and the last point I would say is, yes, we want to plant plants in the middle of the rain garden, but you can also put them around the outsides of it too, to help stabilize the berms, as
Mhm.
Becca showed in some of her photos. So I hope that kind of answers your question, Janet.
Awesome. I see a few plant questions here. I'm just making sure the website's so active. The Network of Nature, so networkofnature.org is a great resource on native plants, but it also has a um, find a native plant nursery feature. So you can learn about plants, which ones might be best suited for you, but you can also find where to find them using a postal code and a map. So rather than recommend specific places, I would check that out and find out what's most convenient for you, where you live or where you travel, and check that out. And then one place I can say I've had luck with is on on like Ontario onplants.ca is a mail order native plant nursery. So for those of you who just can't get to a in-person one, that is a great option. They come really well packaged to your door after the risk of frost. So you just get the box and put them in the shade or plant them right away. And yeah, so some good options there. That's probably on the Network of Nature, but um, and native plants are becoming more and more prolific. Like you can even get them at some like a few varieties at like the grocery store, garden centers, like Sobeys or Zehrs. I'm not sure I don't live in Guelph, I live in Kitchener, so I can't think of the main grocery stores there, but they're becoming more prolific. Just the rain garden niche ones might be harder to find at some of those. So you probably do want to really find a good native plant nursery that'll have a broader selection. All right. I think we've gotten through all the questions. I'm just going to scan back up. Thanks for everyone who stuck around. A lot of you did. That's great. Oh, there's one question at the top. We have water pooling in our backyard after rain events. Oh no, we already answered that. Sorry. There was one about a backyard city outlet. Maybe you typed an answer to that, Ryan. So that's great.
Yeah, that's like, probably like a swale situation again.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's kind of hard to describe over video but it's common for the backyards of properties to convey water, and they're part of the city um, kind of water system, and so that's kind of a trickier situation we'd have to look at. But the main point is we can't really interfere with areas around that catch basin. Would you agree, Becca?
Yeah, definitely. Always goes back to if you're unsure, book a visit. We've done it before. We can't guarantee we can do it again, but we'll do our best. All right. Well, with that, please reach out with any additional questions or submit your interest for a visit, and we'll be in touch. And we'll hope to see many of you soon. Thanks for coming, everybody.
You guys.
Hmm.